Welcome to the LowCarbUSA podcast, where we seek to inspire you to help us build this community. I'm Doug Reynolds.
And this is Pam Devine.
You know, there might have been a true belief, like we talked about Robert Kellogg and those guys, there might have been a true belief in those days that the concepts they were talking about were actually problematic. And that's fine. Just like the Jews thought that the pigs were dirty and they improved their health because of it. But the difference is this: while that has been retained in the Muslim and the Jewish culture, they don't eat pork, and it's become more of a religious thing.
But now it's a religious thing, right? Exactly.
It is a religious thing, but here's the difference: no Jew, no Muslim forces other people to keep halal or to keep kosher,
and that's
the difference. You know, I choose to be kosher. I choose to be halal. Fine. I don't care what you do. I respect what your own cultural identity is, but don't tell me what the fuck I should eat.
Exactly. And that is why, you know, I've been, for the most part, especially this big war between the vegans and the carnivores and stuff, it's like I've been trying to stay out of that because I don't feel it's constructive or useful towards our mission of trying to help people to cut the carbs and you know, take their health back. And so I've tried to stay out of that, and you know, left it to Sean Baker to fight with.
Exactly, Sean's the guy.
And Gary Fettke's now and Belinda are now taking it on as well.
Right, but you see, what I try to do is try to look at the science and the biology and say, look, this is the way it is. You can choose to what extent you want to adhere to that.
Right.
But when it comes to ethics or climate change or morality, all that other stuff, you're on very, very unsteady ground when you're trying to convince me about for science based on your beliefs.
Yeah.
And what I've tried to work really hard at is two things. Number one is to give people my opinion and let them decide what they want to do for themselves. The second thing is to be as factual and as scientific as I can be. And I include in the beliefs epidemiology.
Right.
The epidemiologic studies are so poorly done that they cannot be construed as science.
No, not at all.
And I understand that it's extremely difficult to get scientific data out of free living people, because if you're going to compare two people's diets, who the hell knows they're actually on the diet?
No, unless you do what was that guy's name that came back from Iceland or the North Pole, or wherever it was,
in a place, or the Minnesota study.
Yeah, and then they literally put him in a lab for a year.
Those are called rats in a cage. Those are lockdown studies.
Yeah,
and there's relevance in a lockdown.
That's the only way that you can really genuinely control it properly.
Right.
You know?
And otherwise, epidemiology is less important than the pragmatic side of things.
Yeah.
And you know, we've lost touch with biology. And what I'm trying to do is bring back some of the...
But the only reason that I am pushing back now and again still is exactly what you said a bit earlier, was they can disagree, they can have their opinion, they can have their religious beliefs or whatever. But when you try to get legislation passed to tell me that I can't eat meat, then I have a very serious problem with that.
So it's the evangelism is what I have a problem with.
Yeah.
Don't tell me what I should believe. Don't tell me what I should do. If you want me to do what you're doing, share with me why you do what you do and let me make up my own mind whether I want to do it or not.
Right. But don't try and pass some legislation that tells me I can't eat meat.
Don't tell me I have to.
Yeah. And that's what they're trying to do. And that's what that's what's making it so hard for me to stay out of that fight, because it's, you know, that's wrong. Anyway.
So, you know, I mean, this is the third part of this, and I think it is important along those lines to say, okay, within the paradigm of what we talked about in the last two episodes, what is feasible if you have an objection to eating meat? What is the baseline where you can actually be healthy and do well and not become sick because of what you're eating and drinking, and yet still stay within the boundaries of not eating meat that requires animals to be killed?
Right.
Okay.
Okay, so well, let's go there, and let's just keep going, and let's do that, and I'll just.
Are you taping right now?
Yeah, it's going.
Okay.
So you're good to go.
So that's the I try to it's not that I'm chicken of being confrontational. There's too much confrontation when it comes to nutrition and too little science. And I don't even like the word science, biology. So as you and I were briefly kind of just chatting informally about, is the first 2 episodes, certainly the first one, I was going through the biology of how the human body has evolved and what it is kind of genetically or evolutionarily designed to do best with. And while the beauty about being human is there's a range of stuff, there are certain places outside of that range that result over time in illness. And I explored the concept of the vegan diet. And I understand that it's a very emotive topic. I'm trying to take the emotion out of it. And a couple of things. First of all, a group like Diet Doctor, who I really like. I love Andreas very much. He's done a phenomenal job in promoting the ketogenic life. And the Diet Doctor took on this huge challenge of saying, how do we design a ketogenic diet for vegans? And when it comes to the pure nutritional ABCs, if they could put a bunch of people in a cage and kind of treat them as a rat in a cage and feed them their diet, it would probably be okay for a while. And when I say for a while, anywhere from 1 to 3 years. However, having reviewed the Diet Doctor plan, I would urge everybody to go onto their website and look at their vegan eating plan. I have some distinct conflicts with what they did in terms of the carbohydrate addiction side of things. I have promoted for the last 20 years as myself as the carb addiction doc. And we look at carbohydrates as an addictive drug, not a food source. And once you make that mental transition, once you look at carbohydrates primarily being consumed for the pleasure value, for the endorphin value, not for the nutritional value, and you look at obese and diabetic people or people who have suffered consequences, health consequences as a result of chronic excessive carbohydrate consumption, then you realize that those folks have lost control of their relationship with carbohydrates. And when you're dealing with addiction, harm reduction is impossible. In other words, smoking less, drinking less if you're an alcoholic, smoking less if you're a smoker, only using heroin on Tuesdays if you're a heroin addict. Those methodologies do not work. Number one, they don't feed the addiction. Number two is you're asking someone to tightly control a relationship they've clearly lost control of. And while harm reduction may work for a short period of time, there's no incentive for these people to develop or find other sources of emotional relief, other sources of dissipation of their emotional tension. And as long as they've got access to their drug of choice, be it carbohydrates, in the case of the Diet Doctor vegan diet, they can sustain themselves for a while, but as soon as life throws a curveball at them, the only resource they have is to eat more carbohydrates and to screw the whole thing over. And ultimately, if the vegan diet is designed to make you healthier, it defeats the entire purpose. The other big concern I have with the Diet Doctor method is that they use net carbs. Well, net carbs are some mystical, magical, mathematical formula by which you subtract carbohydrates to give you a smaller number. And I'm afraid that I'm going to use another medical term here. It's just bullshit. My body doesn't do mathematics. My body doesn't regulate things the way a mathematical formula does. The way we need to quantify carbohydrates is by not even what goes in our face, but what goes in our bloodstream. And that's true for nutrition in general. And that'll be an important concept to understand through this talk. All because protein goes in your face, it doesn't necessarily mean it is bioavailable in your bloodstream. Remember, your intestine is actually outside of your body. Think about that. Your intestine is outside of your body. Think of a pipe, and the outside of the pipe being your body, but the lumen, the inside of the pipe, is actually outside. So the intestinal tract, even though there's traffic in and out of that from your body, the intestinal tract is outside of your body. And the only time that food really enters your body is when it crosses the intestinal mucosa, when it crosses into those cells,
Right.
enters your bloodstream, enters your tissues. And we're going to discuss that in more detail as we design the ideal vegetarian diet. But when you're looking at net carbohydrates, that traffic still happens. And pretty much everybody that has been practicing and been an advocate of a ketogenic diet has migrated away from the old Atkins net carbs toward total carbs. And if you calculate the total carbs in the Diet Doctor plan, it's actually a moderate carbohydrate diet. It is not a low carbohydrate diet. And by definition, then, it is giving drug addicts access to their drug. So can a keto vegan diet be done? Sure, it can, for a while, to lose weight, to improve your diabetes. If you are willing to ignore the evolution of malnutrition in order to accomplish weight loss or diabetes management. And that's absolutely fine. I support that for a while. At most, maybe 2 years. But can it be sustained lifelong? Absolutely not. Not from the addiction perspective and not from the health perspective. It is a diet deficient in certain nutrients. And the cop-out then is to supplement, but that also is not effective nor healthy because those supplements that enter your face don't necessarily enter your body. And the most important thing for me about a vegan diet is that we do not know the outcome of a lack of essential fatty acids and essential amino acids. Because the effect of a fatty acid and an amino acid deficiency is incredibly difficult to measure until something really bad happens. There's no lab test to quantify these effectively. So until your brain stops working or until you develop beriberi, or that's thiamine deficiency, but until you develop protein energy malnutrition, which is an end-stage disease, you don't know the effects of the deficiency. We can quantify the deficiency of certain minerals and vitamins and nutrients by measuring their numbers, but we cannot do so for a lack of essential fatty acids and essential amino acids, particularly when we think they're going in our face, but they may not be being absorbed. So ultimately, the Diet Doctor vegan diet remains a diet of harm reduction, and it is not an effective way to treat a carb addict. It likely works better for people that have never had a weight or a metabolic issue than for carb addicts. Because
there are some people like that. So for those people, that's good, right?
Absolutely. A guy like you, Doug,
yeah.
The place where you and I differ is that you've probably abused carbohydrates in your past. I've been a drug addict. I've weighed 300 pounds.
Right. I've abused it big time, but I'm definitely worked out that I'm not an addict like you.
Right. So if you ate a bag of chips today, tomorrow you've got some remorse and you get back on track.
Right.
I ate a bag of chips and it's 3 months and 30 pounds before I realized, oh, hell, I'm in trouble. And that's the difference. And I don't think that the Diet Doctor vegan diet accounts for that.
Mm.
So the issue for me is that people who are trying to correct disease, it's an unsustainable methodology. But I did spend a lot of time before those 2 podcasts were taped, and I've spent a lot of time in my practice because I have a lot of patients who are unwilling to eat vast quantities of animal products, either for health or for religious purposes or others. And instead of condemning them or maligning them, I said, okay, what is the best common denominator? And what we're going to talk about tonight is how can we design a vegetarian diet that ultimately is a well-formulated, ketogenic, real food vegetarian diet with compliments to Steve Finney to introducing me to the concept of a well-formulated ketogenic diet. And each part of this is important. The first part is well-formulated ketogenic diet. In other words, a diet that will keep you in ketosis, where you are using fat as your primary fuel source, not sugar. That's the first concept. The second concept for me is real food. In other words, when I look at food, it should be easy to see that the food had a life. It either grew in the ground or on the ground, or you could kill it. Animals and plants. The more we've processed it, the more we've screwed up with the food from a nutritional perspective, typically. So therefore, I introduced the concept of real food. Vegetarian is a plant-based diet, but not plant-exclusive, because you cannot have a ketogenic diet with that. And the one word I use there, which I personally object to, is the word diet. For this to be effective, it has to be a lifestyle. You know, what's interesting is vegetarians don't define themselves as being on a vegetarian diet. Oh, no, I'm not allowed to eat meat. It's, I am a vegetarian. There's an arrogance that goes with it. And when my patients can become arrogant about the health of what they're eating and drinking, then they're disgusted by the carbohydrates, as opposed to, oh, I'm not allowed to have them, and they feel deprived of them. If you feel deprived, it's just a question of time before you have it. If you feel arrogant about the fact that that's disgusting, how the hell can anyone eat a pizza? You're like the ex-smoker who's a smoker's worst enemy, and that is, you're just not going to go back there. So it's that arrogant advocacy that we're looking for people to have, and that requires a lifestyle, not a diet. So one other comment that I just, before we get into the nuts and bolts of this diet, and one of the other concepts that we really have to understand, and I mentioned this in the first part one of this talk, is that the magnitude of increased eating, quantity and frequency required to get the same nutrition from vegetables and from plants as in meat, not just in protein, but also in fat. And the quality of the protein and the quality of the fat is kept very silent from most plant-based dieters. And this can be very, very misleading to people trying to establish themselves as vegans or vegetarians, because they don't understand how much eating is required because of the poor nutritional value of what they're eating. You know, cows eat for 16 hours a day. Why? Because of the low value of the nutritional food of a grass-based diet. So that's something that we also have to be very, very concerned about, and certainly put out there to say you're going to be eating a lot more. You're going to have to eat a lot more. And that means also you're going to be pooping a lot more. So that's an important but seldom discussed piece of wisdom. Now, let's get into this. And the first important aspect to understand is that obesity is a carbohydrate substance abuse problem. It is not a calorie problem. So we are not going to use the word calories, and we are not going to use the word portions. Your body is designed to tell you when you're full. And the primary activator of satiety in the human body is saturated fat, or fat. When fat enters your intestinal tract, along the way, it triggers the release of a series of hormones. Then when it enters your bloodstream, it in addition triggers hormonal release from your fat cells. And that leptinoid, there's about 5 hormones that we know of that make you feel full and kind of queasy as you begin to eat fat. So fat is an essential component of this diet in order to, as a stopping point, because there is no stopping of carbohydrates. So those are critically important things. We're not going to use the word calories. We're not going to use the word portion control. And because we're primarily dealing with this diet as a diet to make yourself healthier, if you're fat, diabetic, have PCOS, whatever it may be, the goal here is 0 carbohydrates. Now, technically, if you're a dietitian, you're going to say, well, it's impossible to eat 0 carbohydrates because every plant has carbohydrates in it. Absolutely true. But we don't count cellulose carbohydrates because you cannot absorb them. Human beings, as we said in the first segment, have lost the capacity to extract calories, sugar calories, from plants, from cellulose plants. Starchy plants are different. Grains are different. Yes, you can extract the carbohydrates from them, so they're kind of on the no list because you don't want to eat carbohydrates. But we do not count the carbohydrate content of your leafy vegetables because they're not absorbable.
I always get in trouble for interrupting you in the comments, but I just wanted to clarify something here. When you talk about you don't count so when you look at, say, spinach, And you look at the, the what's it called, the table of
right. You break
macros,
down. You break
right?
it down in a laboratory.
Right. So it'll say a certain amount of fiber and a couple of carbs of, I think they call it sugars. So do you count none of that? Do you count do you still count the 2 grams of sugar? Or I've never been totally clear since we've been having this series of things. Is exactly when you say you don't count it at all, is that literally you don't count it at all?
Correct. For 2 reasons. For 2 reasons, Doug. First of all, what's that in front of you? Not the wine. What's that brown thing in front of you? Tap on that.
Which brown
There's
thing?
a desk. There's a desk.
Oh, that's
okay.
Thing, yeah.
I assume it's made of wood.
It is, yes.
Take a bite of it.
Hell no.
Well, that wood is pure sugar. It's cellulose. But if you eat it, all you're going to get is a mouthful of splinters. Now, if an elephant came along and ate that, their intestinal tract would be able to extract some sugar from that. But we don't have the bacteria that can process that cellulose. So when you eat the spinach, that fiber, that roughage that the vegetarians and the old fiber docs love to talk about, that's basically coming out in your poop. So if you could, in the laboratory, they break it down, they chop it up into its individual components. Sure, there's carbohydrates. But remember what we said about your intestine being on the outside of your body. That spinach is going in your face and coming out in your poop.
So
if you
none of the carbohydrates are getting absorbed at all.
Extremely few. Now, the problem is, and this is why we say never drink your calories. Because if you take that spinach and you make a smoothie, you've processed it and you've allowed some of that sugar to come out. Not all of it, but a lot of it. By processing it, you've allowed a lot of that sugar to come out. So the first issue is how you eat it. And that's why we say you're eating real food. The more you process it, the more you're extracting the sugar. You take an orange, it's got a certain amount of sugar in it. You take 8 oranges and you squeeze them into a orange juice glass. Now you've got 8 oranges in that cup. And it's a glass of orange juice has got more sugar in it than a can of Coke. But the people that advertise on TV are going to tell you how healthy it is. They're not going to tell you how much sugar there is in it. Does that make sense? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, so what we talk about is bioavailability. The second key thing that distinguishes me from the dietitians is the concept of addiction. If you've had a rough day and you come out and you rush to the fridge and pig out on a massive bowl of spinach, we have a problem. I've never met that person. So one of the key concepts that we focus on is not about the pure carbohydrate content. It is about the endorphin trigger. And I can tell you that leafy vegetables do not trigger endorphin excess. Does that make sense? So whether it's you who's a non-addict or me who's an addict, I'm not coming home and rushing out and eating those leafy vegetables because I can't extract the sugar in an adequate quantity to get me high.
Right.
Does it make sense?
Totally.
Okay. So we've got to put this in the context of the addiction model, as well as extractable bioavailable sugar. And those are key concepts. So we do not count the carbohydrate content at all of leafy vegetables. But your starchy vegetables and your fruit absolutely count, and they should be on the no list. Because the carbohydrate concentration and the bioavailability is massive. I'll give you one other comment about that. When people, oh, well, this happened. Very simple thing. When I wear a CGM, continuous glucose monitor, and I eat a bowl of salad, my blood sugar doesn't go up. If it goes up, it's minute, but it doesn't go up. And that tells me that bioavailability isn't there.
Right, because it's not like just
because it's not registering
glucose into your bloodstream. Yeah.
Correct. And if it's not making my blood sugar go up, it's not making my insulin go up. Because the issue here is primarily insulin, not just sugar. So from a biologic perspective, the leafy vegetables contain a lot of nutrients which we can extract. The minerals, the vitamins, that kind of thing. But the energy value, it takes a massive amount. And there may be a tiny fraction of energy quantity that we do extract, but it's so trivial that it doesn't bump the blood sugar, and it certainly doesn't activate the addiction, so you're not going to eat it to excess. In fact, one of the premises of a vegetarian diet is that because it is so calorie poor, you actually lose a lot of weight once you reduce your insulin sensitivity. Now, insulin, at least once you regain insulin sensitivity, when you're insulin resistant, no matter what you're eating, your insulin levels stay high and they block fat mobilization. And the problem then is, if you don't eat enough, when your blood sugar starts to drop because of that high insulin, you get hungry. And people that are on a carbohydrate diet are eating repeatedly. I don't like intermittent fasting, but they're intermittently eating because their blood sugar is going down all the time, but they're insulin resistant. So when their blood sugar goes down, they can't access their stored fat because insulin blocks the mobilization of fat. Only once they become insulin sensitive are they then able to use their own fat, and they can then not eat for long periods of time. So for me, intermittent fasting is, I don't feel like eating. It isn't something I intentionally do. It's something that evolves as you become insulin sensitive. And I know Jason does it the other way around because of the population he works with. I like to ease into IF, not start there. But that's philosophy. That's based on populations that we deal with. Jason's working in Toronto with a lot of folks who are uncomfortable giving up their core starches.
Right.
In most of my patients, they're comfortable giving up some of the core starches at first. So the goal there is to understand biology rather than what you measure in a lab. Biology and human behavior are equally important. But the goal ultimately is no bioavailable starches. In other words, your CGM shouldn't move. And as I said, what we want to do is eat naturally occurring fats and oils. And the first goal of starting a vegetarian diet is to rapidly become fat adapted. How do you do that? You eat low calorie density, and I don't use that word very often, low calorie density food, which is your leafy vegetables, not your starchy vegetables, and you enrich them with a massive amount of oils and nuts and seeds and fats. So basically what you're getting in is essentially fibrous vegetables or leafy vegetables and a lot of oil. What that does, even though there's a protein deficiency to begin with, your body very quickly adapts to get into ketosis. And the goal here is to get you into ketosis as quickly as possible to reduce your insulin resistance, to regain insulin sensitivity. And in that way, there's a seamless transition between the fat that you eat and your own stored fat.
Right.
That's the starting point. Now, there's a difference when it comes to sustainability, but the starting point is to get into ketosis as quickly as possible to begin weight loss and to begin the resolution of diabetes. And because vegetables are absorbable calorie poor, a vegetarian start is not a bad way to initiate this process. So, you got a question?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I remember back from previous episodes that we've done where you also talk about making sure that you lead with the fat, so that you fat fortifying the stuff right in the beginning in your very first bite, so that you start to generate those hormone responses, the leptinoids as you call them, so that that sensation of satiety, it doesn't lag behind what you're eating, and you actually feel full when you really are full.
My God, Doug, you listen when you're asleep. That's exactly, no, you're exactly right. That's exactly right. So the other starting point for starting a ketogenic vegetarian diet is simple rule, and I have this with all my diets: don't eat or drink anything unless you absolutely know the total carbohydrate content. Because you really want to know where they're lying to us.
Right.
And, they might say, oh, honey's natural sugar. Well, I'll tell you, honey is sugar. And it's the same as whether you get it from a donut or an apple or honey. Sugar is sugar when it enters your bloodstream. So know what you're putting in your face, and it's always total carbohydrates, never net carbohydrates. The whole thing with vegetable carbohydrates is that's kind of where net evolved from. Well, these are fiber carbohydrates, these are alcohol carbohydrates. No. You either count them or you don't, because to count net carbohydrates is okay on a 21-day diet, but it's unsustainable lifelong for most people. Most people are not going to count everything all the time. And what we're looking at is the long-term picture. I need to be able to look at a piece of food and say, that's okay for me to eat, that's not okay. And it's very binary. You either can or you can't. And I want you to establish that up front by knowing what the starchy carbohydrate content is, the bioavailable carbohydrates. So you can read the labels or you can Google the total carbohydrate content. And then the final thing in terms of the preamble is always remember, cooking and preparing food should be a wonderful, relaxing endorphin experience. In other words, I want you to get high on the preparation of the food and the enjoyment of the food, not the drug value of the food that you're eating. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I don't want you to get high on the ice cream, the carbohydrates in the ice cream. I want you to get high on the preparation of a salad, or taking your walk out and making salad. Or making a vegetarian dish. I want you to get high on the preparation and how pretty and how beautiful it looks. So I tell people, always take the photograph. Take a photograph when you're prepared. Be proud of what you're doing, because that's the endorphin high you're trying to replace. But if you generate that endorphin high from within by the act of preparing the food, it's much better than getting it from the drug that you're going to call food. Okay, so as I said, the goal is as close to zero non-vegetable carbohydrates as possible. Okay, so non-leafy vegetables, the leafy vegetables don't count, but for the rest, you want to count everything, and it needs to be as close to zero as you can possibly get. Now, the truth is, there are some incidentals. If I'm going to drink a bottle of Gatorade Zero, there's actually one carbohydrate in Gatorade Zero. That has to count to my incidentals. And we want to cap those incidentals, and I'd never want the incidentals to go above 30. So the 30 is not an eat up to. It's not I've only eaten 5 the whole day, therefore I can have a chocolate chip cookie for 20. It's you want to be as close to zero as possible, but never above 30, even on the incidentals.
Right, but it's not an allowance.
It's not exactly right. It's not an allowance.
Right.
It's not an allowance. Good. So the issue with the vegan diet, the absolute non-animal product diet, the issue is a deficiency in essential protein, essential fat, B12, calcium, vitamins, A, D, E, K, zinc, and iron. So when we design a vegetarian diet, which is a move a little bit towards some of the animal products, the primary goal is to establish an adequate supply of those nutrients in what you're eating. You can still be almost completely vegan, but the supplement that we do is not from GNC or a vitamin store. The supplementation comes from certain renewable animal products. That's the purpose of introducing animal products, is to give us a complete edible diet from the earth, not from a shop. Okay? So those are the key things that we're going to supplement a baseline. So your basic diet is vegan, but we're going to add a few things to make up for what's not in a vegan diet. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And remember, nutrition is a team sport. So to just take vitamin D or just take fish oil doesn't really count effectively. You need the other players together with that because of absorption. If you just take a vitamin D pill, it's never going to be absorbed because it's a fat-soluble vitamin. It needs fat. So you want to eat it with fat. Otherwise, you're just pooping it out. So that's an important concept that a lot of people that are into supplementation do not completely understand. Okay. The next part is make sure you're adding salt, 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 salt. When you remove the carbohydrates, you dehydrate, and the human body uses salt to regulate blood pressure, thirst, and electrolytes. And the human body can deal very efficiently with an excess salt, but it doesn't tolerate a deficiency very well. And if you're deficient in magnesium, calcium, and potassium, it's usually because you're sodium deficient. And then your body's exchanging, it's hanging onto the salt, the sodium, and getting you to pee out or poop out the magnesium. Salt is very important, and you avoid a lot of what's called the keto flu with salt. So how do we initiate this in practice? We start with a 36-hour calorie fast. That's something new in my practice. I've adopted that from Jason. So we start with a 36-hour calorie fast. It's the fastest way to reset. It sucks. It's miserable. Especially the worst time for me is that first morning. If you've got a whole day the next morning. But if you can make it through to lunchtime or possibly dinner time, there's a euphoria that comes in when you get into ketosis. So my starting point, you don't have to, but my recommendation is a 36-hour calorie fast. What does that mean? It means you don't eat or drink anything with calories. And you can consume any zero-calorie liquids. They're fine, as much of them as you want to. And I encourage my patients to drink broth. And you can drink vegetable broth. You could drink chicken broth if you want to, but for the vegetarian diet, you want to drink vegetable broth and add salt to it. So that's the way you get adequate salt in.
And is this for patients just when they first come in? Is it patients that you're trying to do this to avoid having surgery? What sort of patients are we targeting here?
This is at initiation.
Okay, when they first come in.
This is when you first come in and you've been eating the standard American diet, and you say, I want to start this process. It's a deep dive. You're going to go to the deep end of the pool and you're going to jump in. And the deep dive is the 36-hour calorie fast.
Right, but I mean, most of your patients have initially come to you asking for surgery, right?
Some of them more and more now are coming for diabetes treatment because they're already doing keto.
Okay.
And I've now got I've always had a lot of patients who are vegetarian. And remember this, and this is so important. I understand that I'm a surgeon, but you don't do surgery in lieu of a diet. You do surgery to augment, to improve, or to manage, to sustain the dietary changes these people are making. And that's a big difference. You know, I tell people this, that it's so sad that the group of people in the obesity space that know the least about obesity are the surgeons that do bariatric surgery, because they're so good at stopping you from eating, they don't understand why you became fat in the first place. So you've got to address the cause, which is your addiction to carbohydrates, before you do something to lose the weight. Everybody comes in obsessed about weight loss, and they're not willing or prepared or understand what they need to do from a dietary perspective. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, really.
So,
that's
I've
why I
said
just wanted
before.
to get a clarification on.
Yeah. No, so take my surgery out of the equation on this. Any person that comes in with your diabetic, fat, PCOS, I see a lot of PCOS patients now. There are fertility clinics that are sending me their patients to do the PCOS management part, or the gestational diabetes side when they're pregnant, or the autism side when they're at risk for having an autistic baby. They've had them before, or whatever it may be. So what I start them out with, if you say, okay, I want to do a vegetarian form of this diet, that's my starting point. And it also separates the serious people from the people that are just dicking around with us. So a simple question that I ask my patients when they first come in, and you can try this for yourself. I say, okay, pretend you're on a boat in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, because the Atlantic Ocean is nicer than the Pacific. And the boat is sinking. And you look up and there's two islands. You can swim to one island or the other, but you can't swim between the islands. And you're going to be on those islands for a long time. One island, as you look up, only has animals on it. And the other island only has plants on it. And you know that's what you're going to be living off. Which island are you going to choose to swim to? And obviously I know
animals.
You're going to the animal plant. But a lot of my patients, for a variety of reasons, say no, they're going to swim to
They're going to the plant one. Yeah.
I don't want to say, no, don't swim to that one, swim to the animal one. I'm saying, okay, here's what we're going to do on the animal, on the vegetarian, on the vegetable or the plant island. And that's kind of the principle behind this diet. Does that make sense? Or this eating plan. So the first part, the first 36 hours is a 0-calorie fast. And what it does is, for someone like yourself, if you were just eating the standard American diet, but you didn't have illnesses yet, you would get into ketosis very quickly. It helps to sensitize you to insulin just a little bit. And it initiates that process whereby you lose your hunger. And that's what Jason uses quite a bit. And I really like the way he does that. And most people can tolerate a 36-hour calorie fast. When you think about Muslims, they go through Ramadan, which is 40 days of 24 hours or 23 hours, okay? So once you've done the 36 hours, we then start with a 5 to 7 day keto cleanse. Now, I hate the word cleanse because everyone thinks that the colon should be cleansed. That's bullshit. The colon is the dumping ground, okay? But I've used this word keto cleanse because it kind of sounds sexy. What does it mean? It means for 5 to 7 days, you are eating pure leafy vegetables and salads. No animal products, no starch. So it's your vegan diet. It's your standard vegan diet. It's your keto vegan diet. No starchy stuff. No beans, no pumpkins, no rice, no potatoes, no grains, but no animal products. No honey, no eggs, no cheese, no nothing. And you do that for 5 to 7 days, but you want to add salt to that. And you always, always, always want to add as much what I call pressed oils as you can tolerate. Just to back up a little bit, the way oils from plants are created is 2 different ways. You either heat them up, which is typically what we do with seed oils. We heat extract the oil, which is a very destructive form of extracting oil, and it creates a lot of polyunsaturated, unhealthy fats. We used to think that margarine and those fats were healthy. They're not. They're very unhealthy. Pressed oils are where you take an olive, you take an avocado, you take a coconut even, and you squeeze the oil from it. So there's no real heat involved. And this is a plant that is very rich, or plant or a fruit that is very rich in oil, and all you're doing is extracting the oil by squeezing it, by pressing it. And therefore it retains all the natural properties of the oil. Whether it's a monounsaturated oil or a polysaturated or a monounsaturated oil or a saturated oil, that's your olive oil, that's your coconut oil, the avocado oil being somewhere in between. The seed oils are not healthy because of the way that we extract it. And certainly what I call the industrial oils, the Criscos and things like that, those you can take out and lubricate your car's engine with, but don't put them in your mouth, okay? That's what Crisco is.
Yeah.
It's an industrial oil during the Second World War that people say, tastes good, let's eat that. Having said that, so your first 5 to 7 days, ideally 7, but if you can tolerate 5, is a pure leafy vegetable vegan diet with a high volume of oils. Now, we understand that for those 5 to 7 days, it's going to be very little protein. You're going to be okay. You're going to get a tiny fraction of protein, maybe a tiny fraction of carbohydrate, but a massive amount of oil. So you're really fat adapting your body, which is what we want. Once you've gotten into that 5-day cleanse, then we go alternate days. The first alternate day after your 5 to 7 is what I call my full plant day. The full plant day includes all vegetables, but no rice or potatoes or starchy vegetables, the very heavy starchy vegetables. But here's the interesting thing, and people will argue with me about this. This is where I, to a certain extent, adopt a little bit of the diet doctor side, where you can have some beans, you can have some tofu. Yes, there's a significant amount of total carbohydrates in that food, but it's highly enriched with a lot of vitamins and protein. So it's a good source of protein. And unfortunately, in the vegetarian diet, the really only effective vegetable source of protein. But the more you minimize your starchy vegetables, the better. Never rice or potatoes. What I have found, though, is that very, very few people come home and, again, after a rough day, pig out on a pile of beans. If that's you, we want to be super careful about it. But for the most part, you can include some starchy vegetables, primarily with a higher protein content. And when you're eating a full plant diet, it also includes what I call renewable animal products. I understand the aversion to killing animals and eating them. But when you're eating eggs and cheese and maybe some cream, so it's the dairy products, which is milk from a cow or a goat or a sheep, and eggs, those cover a huge spectrum of readily bioavailable nutrients and energy, particularly protein and healthy fat. So you're getting all of your essential proteins. Remember, an egg becomes a chicken. It isn't a chicken yet, so you're not killing anything because it hasn't been fertilized, but it's got everything that is required to make a chicken, which means that it's got the full nutritional complement to make a chicken. So you've got all your amino acids, all your essential fatty acids, and it's a very healthy source of supplements for a vegan diet. And then the same is true for cheese and potentially cream. If you're going to drink some coffee, you can throw some heavy cream in there. So on those days, on the day after your keto cleanse, you eat a full plant diet. with renewable animal products which are high in protein, high in fat, in the right proportions. And you do that for one day. The next day is again a leafy plant, nut, seed, and oil diet. So you have your salad or your vegetable diet. You can put it in a wok. You can do it whatever you want to. You can add nuts and seeds and oils. So every other day is going to be a vegan diet followed by a vegetarian renewable animal product diet. And if you do that from a nutritional perspective, you can maintain your vegan roots, but supplement with healthy, renewable animal products. And at as close to a healthy vegan you can be, that is it. I cannot condone, from a pure health perspective, anything more isolationist in terms of animal products than that. So the compromise is to include renewable sources of animal products, particularly the eggs and the cheeses and the dairy. And in that way, you can actually minimize the starchy vegetables and yet still get your protein and your fat in. I don't mind on those full plant days to eat a little bit, but you want to be super careful about your addiction to carbohydrates, and never any grains. I don't care if it's quinoa or corn, you stay the hell away from the grains. They have gluten in them, they have a lot of antigens in them, and they have a ton of endorphin activating carbohydrates in them. Now, let's go to one phase above that. And well, let me just, before I complete that, the renewable animal sources are butter, whole milk, heavy creams, eggs, with the yolk being the healthiest part, which are great to supplement so you don't have to go to GNC. Cheese of any kind, full cream preferably, not skim milk, but the carbohydrate content of those products does count. The next phase up, and there are a lot of vegetarians that are comfortable doing this, which is not eating animals from the earth, but they're okay eating fish and seafood. And even if you're just eating a piece of fish once a week, twice a week, especially if it can be the fattiest fish you can possibly eat, the pesca vegetarians, which are fish, seafood eating vegetarians, you don't have to do it very often. And for example, Bill Clinton, I don't know if he's still doing it, but about 5 or 6 years ago, I had a long conversation with him when he had those scares with his heart attack. And that's basically what he considered himself to be, is a vegetarian who eats fish from time to time. Once or twice a week, he'll eat fish. And if you're eating fish and maybe some of the renewable animal products, the eggs and the cheese, you're getting about as perfect a nutritious diet as you can possibly have when it encompasses and includes vegetables. Sure, you can go toward the more carnivorous side, but if you're going to be call yourself a vegetarian, the pesca vegetarian is the healthiest way to be, or the renewable protein source or renewable animal product source. Those are the two vegetarians that I think are reasonable to do. And even if you're just doing that fish or seafood once or twice a day, this is what boggles my mind. I get the vegans who who take a fish oil pill. Well, where did that fish oil come from? Did the fish poop it? Is there a fish oil tree out there? No, it's not. That came from the death of a fish. So don't tell me that you're a vegan if you're taking fish oil. You're eating the products of a dead fish. So why not eat the whole damn fish? Don't be altruistic in that regard. Fish oil comes from a fish. That's why it's called fish oil. Okay, so just a simple little thing. Now, if you manufacture it in a plant, it's called an MCT oil or a different type of oil. But you're looking for the 3 omega oils, and those you don't get adequately in a vegetarian diet. Plus the full spectrum, particularly the 9 essential amino acids. And the goal is to get into ketosis as quickly and for as long a period of time as you can be. You really don't want to come out of ketosis. That's why we add the nuts, the seeds, the oils to everything we eat. We fat fortify everything to keep you in ketosis, and in that way, you induce insulin sensitivity. And the goal, the objective of health, is to restore insulin to its proper place, where insulin is no longer controlling blood sugar directly, it's controlling glucagon, and glucagon is controlling blood sugar. And that is the goal of insulin sensitivity. Insulin's job is not to remove sugar from the bloodstream. That's its backup job. Insulin's primary job is to control fat mobilization from your fat cells and control glucagon's production of sugar from glycerol, fatty acids, and glycerol, and protein, amino acids. And you sure as hell don't want to use your own amino acids to produce that sugar. You want to use the amino acids that you consume, and therefore you have to eat enough, and there's not enough in a vegan diet. So therefore you end up using your own muscles to produce that energy, and we don't want that to happen. We want it to come from your food. So those are the biologic principles. The fat fortification, olive oil, avocado oil, coconut oil. If you can make a vegan mayo or a mayo out of eggs, that's ideal. Heavy cream. Those are my 5 fat friends on a vegan diet, or sorry, on a vegetarian diet. You want to add salt liberally to your food because it regulates your blood pressure, your thirst, and your electrolytes. No fruit, no berries. Berries are just small fruits. Thanks, Eric Westman. He told me that, and I love the line. Berries are just baby little fruits.
Right.
All these keto people say, oh, berries are fine. No, they're not. Not in my book, because you do drive-bys, they activate the addiction. The only fruit you eat on a vegetarian diet is avocados, tomatoes, and olives. And they are a great source of fat. So they're a great way to supplement your diet and enrich the fat content. But you want to avoid all grains, potatoes, rice, yogurts, tortillas, pastas, bread products, popcorn, battered foods, sweets, chips. You want to avoid all the lookalikes. Stay the hell away from keto bread, low-carb pasta, low-carb ice cream. Stay the hell away from that. If pasta made you fat and sick, then why the hell are you trying to recreate and bring back into your life the very thing that was trying to kill you? It doesn't make sense to me. And please don't use alternative flours. Oh, I'm using coconut flour. I'm using almond flour. No, you're not. You're using flour. And you're battering something. You're recreating what tried to kill you. So I am opposed to the alternate flours for the most part. The goal here is to get into ketosis so that you're eating once or twice a day. So that you're following an 18-6 or a 23-1, and even on a high-fat vegetarian diet with some protein supplementation from renewable animal products, that is very feasible. The problem on a pure vegetarian diet is it's difficult to do an 18-6 because you've got to eat so much over such a long time, and you can't fit it into 2 meals a day. So if you supplement with the renewable animal products, it makes it fairly easy to do. You don't want to consume any calories for breakfast. You can have a cup of coffee. I don't mind a little bit of cream in the coffee, but you want to go as deep into the day riding the wave of ketosis before you eat. So breakfast is the least important meal of the day. You can start with lunch as your first meal, end with an evening meal as your second meal, and no snacking. A snack, and I love this because people are starting to associate this comment with me, a snack is always, always, always an emotional event. And a snack is a calorie-containing thing that you consume for your brain. And I don't care what that snack is, whether it's a piece of lettuce, a piece of cheese, or some ice cream. A snack is a snack. A bridge is something you can drink usually, my cup of coffee, some Crystal Light, some water, that gets you over that moment of mind cleansing that has no calories in it. And you want to create that relationship with that bridge to manage the mind cleansing moments without it being a source of calories. You want to anchor your day consistently around those 1 to 2 events, eating events per day. So they become routine in your day, and that's kind of where my intermittent fasting comes in. But a meal is sitting down at a table with a plate of food and a knife and fork. If you're eating some vegetarian bar or some kind bar that's made of nuts and honey and chocolates, and that isn't food, Doug. That's a snack. And you're eating it for this, not for this. So if you are too busy to sit at a table with a plate of food and a knife and fork, you're too busy to have a meal, and you're unlikely to die of anorexia or turn into an Olsen twin if you skip that meal. It's not going to happen. Okay? So don't be afraid of, oh, I'm going to get malnourished if I don't eat this meal. It's perfectly fine. Getting used to intermittent fasting is what the body does when it's fat fortified. Cut your food up, chew it really well, take your time eating. Don't be a Rottweiler, be a Chihuahua. You can eat and drink, but try to separate eating and drinking. Drink right until you eat. Try not to eat while you're drinking, and then drink again afterwards. It increases the speed at which you feel full. And very simply, avoid what doesn't agree with you. What doesn't agree with you. You don't have to eat everything. Some things are just based on each person's individual preference, and it's absolutely fine to skip certain things that you don't like. I don't like peppers. I don't eat them. Dessert is part of your emotion management system. Dessert is an activity. Get up and go and do something. Play a game of cards. Take the dog for a walk. Get up and do something fun. You don't need to eat to relax. Occupy your mind and give yourself a mental break. That's what dessert is. Dessert ends the meal with a walk, with a game of cards, as I said, with doing something fun or pleasurable. And never drink your calories. I don't care if it's a soup, if it's a smoothie, if it's a kale smoothie. You're extracting the sugar from the product that you can't extract sugar from. You eat kale, it comes out in your poop. You make it into a smoothie, you're extracting the sugar. If calories run through a fork, it is not okay to drink. So stay away from the soups, the thin soups, stay away from the smoothies, stay away from the shakes and the shots and all the artificial crap. I do not have a protein shake tree in my backyard. Maybe in California you guys do. Okay?
Yeah.
Use those sugar-free fluids as a bridge, and it's okay to use artificial sweeteners if you have to. I'm not a huge fan, but they're okay to have. And then the final piece is, remember that when you remove carbohydrates, you're leaving not only a nutritional deficit, but you're also leaving an emotion management deficit. Find things to do rather than to consume to help you to dissipate your emotional tension. Whether it's something physically active, whether it's something creative like reading a book or playing a musical instrument, whether it's something spiritual, whether it's something that involves human connection, build a diversity of new emotion management skills and tools. Obsess about the fun that you're having by doing it rather than the pleasure you're getting from what you're eating and drinking. Enjoy cooking rather than the high you get from the carbohydrates. And this can become a lifestyle for you. And if you follow these recommendations, you can stick to your vegetarian roots and yet still be healthy without killing a lot of animals.
You've been listening to an episode of the Low Carb USA podcast. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/lowcarbusa.